here are our speakers for the day, and I'm going to let them introduce themselves. They will do themselves a little bit more justice than I probably would. Kim, start with you.
Sure. Well, thanks for coming. I'm Senior Director of Data and AI Product Management at PepsiCo. And so after building the FinOps organization, the centralized FinOps team that's responsible for all the FinOps, reporting, allocation, cost optimization, recommendations, et cetera, I moved over on the other side and became one of their biggest customers on the data and analytics side. And so I'm taking all of those practices that we built and actually using them and driving optimization within our data analytics and AI platforms specifically.
Hi, I'm Lisa, and I work for Northrop Grumman, and I have worked to build up the cloud economics practice at Northrop Grumman, including asset management, software, and we're tied in with global supply chains. So we handle it from cradle to grave with the negotiations of the contract all the way through the cost optimizations and the hand-holding with the customers and all that good stuff.
They have built some really incredible things where they are, and they're being very modest. So I hope you all have a lot of tough questions for them today. You know, the topic is really about AI innovation, what has happened there, and then the financial accountability within their organizations. So we'll deep dive on that, about talking about the cost patterns that have occurred because of AI coming into their situations, how they build alignment across their teams, which is critical to success. I'm sure you all know, and I've heard a lot about it. These women educate me all the time about this. And then expansion and what's going to happen in the role of AI, and it's going to impact each and every one of you throughout. So I am going to start with some questions for the ladies first. But again, if you do have a question, feel free to raise your hand as we go along. Oh, and let me go ahead. There we go. You're probably like, you didn't put the QR code up. Sorry. There's a QR code. Please submit any questions to them. So, Kim, and I have to have help here. So sorry, I've got a reader. Let's talk about how your FinOps practice evolved to deal with the AI functionality. And Kim, I'm going to start with you on that.
Sure. So incorporation of AI came naturally as a part of how we built out FinOps, and then focusing specifically on the analytics and AI piece, because we're looking at all the cloud spend anyway. So in that context, AI wasn't really special. I know we all want it to be special. It sounds like it's really special, but it's just more cloud spend. And so as we were doing the reporting on who's spending what, of course, we use a tagging strategy because that's what everybody says. With respect to accurate billing and allocation, you have to have a tagging strategy. So based on the tagging strategy, we know what's being consumed by the teams that are doing the heavy AI work and what's not. And so it was just a natural extension, bringing that together. It requires a little different monitoring, right? You're driving up costs in different services than you were before. And so we had to pay some closer attention to that. But it just sort of evolved naturally because it was just more of the same, just different services.
And our system, I'll say, has evolved to handle AI because we treat AI like any other service, similar to what you're saying. And what we do when we get a new service, regardless of what it is we examine it. We start with the calculator and we work backwards. What are the elements that drive that particular service? So AI has different elements. It's charged in different ways, but it's no different from learning all about infrastructure as a service and jumping to object-based storage. Those are two completely different things. They're costed in different ways. They're controlled in different ways. AI isn't one thing. So, you just take each AI service as it's coming along and you examine what are the inputs, what drive costs, how can I optimize it, and you make up a recipe book for that particular service. So that's how we've incorporated.
So are those the only changes you've had to make, or are you finding that this is impacting you in other ways that you've had to make changes for?
Well, it's absolutely impacting us in other ways. I mean, one of the other things we're looking at, obviously, are long-term implications. So if we want to, on the, I'll say, FinOps for AI portion is more of the calculation and the looking at that type of stuff, but the AI for FinOps often makes you think, where do I want to put all my data that might be helpful in examining this long term? So talking to kind of your data lake situation, that becomes the other piece. So it's a short term and a long term thing, I think, together.
What about you? What changes have you had to make?
I think it can skyrocket quickly anything in the cloud can, but this in particular can. And so we've worked really hard on proactive versus reactive FinOps, right? And so a lot of the sessions here, a lot of what we've all talked about, myself included, are reactive FinOps, right? What do we do? The cost is X, we want it to be Y, how do we get it there, kind of thing. But we've also put a lot of effort on the analytics side and on the AI side as well in terms of building models or portals or fancy spreadsheets or whatever you want to call it that enable us to input all the parameters that are going to drive the cost for analytics or AI. And AI has a bigger list so that we can accurately forecast what is the cost going to be for whatever the product is we're building. And so that was one extra piece that we had to do so that we didn't just build it and look at it and go, oh, well, the cost is X. That wasn't really what we planned, right? How do you know what you planned? And the only way to know what you planned is to actually look at all the pieces, to your point, and say, okay, well, I'm going to have these 5 pieces. I'm going to run this twice a day. I'm going to run this 5 times a day, whatever it is, and so that you can calculate those costs. And so we've done a very thorough job, in my view, of putting together, here's what we think it's going to be from a proactive fashion, make sure it's optimized when we build it. And then circling back with the reactive piece, and are we on target or are we not on target, and what are we going to do about it?
Yeah, I've heard you talk a lot about being proactive. Both of you have talked a lot about actually trying to get ahead of it. And I know that this is one of the things that you grapple with AI, but are there other components within just the FinOps that, not to stray from the AI topic, but within FinOps that you all are finding that you're now able to get in front of because of AI? Sorry, I'm kind of going.
I am able to get in front of things because we made a concerted effort before we really got into cloud too much to start building trust. From the very beginning, we wanted to build trust with our customers. I work for a company that has a lot of engineers. I'm an engineer, so I understand that all engineers think they know best. And so you have to convince, cajole, and charm people into, hey, let's do it this way. And let me show you why. Let me not just tell you that that's what we need to do. Let me show you the implications of your actions. And so that helped us get out in front of AI because we were working for 2.5 years to build that trust so we could do automation for regular cloud stuff. And so now we've got that trust, we can sit down with these guys or gals and say, what is it you're trying to accomplish? And so we're in the beginning, we're in the design phase before they build something. We're not getting called because somebody had an oopsie unbridled. I mean, doesn't mean it can't happen, right? But generally speaking, when someone wants to build something, they reach out to our cloud management organization and go, what are your thoughts? And that's tremendous. That's huge.
Yeah. Anything else for you, Kim, on that one?
I think it's about the education and making sure that people understand what it is they're doing and what the parts are. You know, it's very easy to talk to various vendors or various engineers and other organizations, you know, hey, just do this kind of thing. But if you don't really understand all the pieces and what the costs are of all the pieces, you can find yourself in a pickle. And so from a monitoring strategy, it evolves a little bit because you have new things like tokens, you have the whole GPU situation, right? I think it was in the keynote this morning that somebody made a reference to GPU's expense. So you want to look at what are you using, why are you using it, what services do you really need? We've had a big focus on prod versus non-prod, right? For production, we may need to do things a certain way. Okay, fine, but that doesn't mean non-prod needs to match it. And so we've had success in optimization specifically where we looked at non-prod and said, hey, you know, we can do this twice a week. We don't need to do this every day. And we don't need to do this multiple times a day to reduce the cost. And so it's kind of a different lens.
That's really smart.
Oh,
Sorry.
thank you.
Sorry. Okay, this kind of, this a little bit leads into sort of, we're going to talk about culture. And so I know I've heard from both of you about like how you had to, especially when you were first really building your FinOps capabilities at your organizations, how did you go, to your point, like with the engineers going, oh no, I got this, I know, right? How did you actually really affect their culture? Can you give us some examples?
I can absolutely give some examples of culture change. One of the big, and I won't say it's a fight really, but it's like when when you as a person are tasked by your company to figure something out, and you come back and you're briefing whatever executive you're briefing, and you're saying, this is what I think. I came out of the gate going, there's no way you're going to talk anybody into anything by installing some automation. It's going to be good old-fashioned, lots of hours talking to people, lots of hours of listening to people, lots of hours of going, I hear you, I understand, I get what you're coming from, and being able to publish back their feelings and fears and hopes and concerns to everyone else so that you're really listening. And you actually say, we changed this because you said that. And so having that feedback loop, that instills a tremendous amount of trust. They're not like, I'm just screaming into the void. You know, they feel like they're being listened to. So that was a big change, is that our management is now okay with us having 5 to 10 people who go out and do cloud cost optimizations and talk to individual customers and convince them, hey, let's resize. I think this will work for you. Let's redesign this. Let's do that. That's a huge change.
That is. Okay. Kim, do you have something, a good best practice?
I think we did certainly a mass marketing campaign, right, with all the application folks and the cloud owners and business units and everything else about what we could bring to the table. And I don't know, I think part of it is building trust. I think the other part is not being dictatorial about it, right? Initially, people were like, well, you're saying I have to do X and you're going to go tattle on me if I don't do it, right? Yeah. But that wasn't actually the plan, because what I keep telling folks specifically is we can come to the table with recommendations. And as product owner of the piece that I have, right, I'm going to look at all of those recommendations and think, okay, well, we should do this or we should do that. But you can't do everything, first off, right? Start small, do something small, and get some success under your belt. Don't go change the world tomorrow, because that's usually not a good idea. But the other thing is, we really have to be dependent on the people who own the various services. And there was I think I referenced it in one of my other sessions, there was a FinOps session in the podcast from the FinOps Foundation, where the FinOps team went off and did stuff because it was an optimization activity, and they took down production. And then people had to spend like the entire weekend restoring everything because it had implications that the FinOps team didn't know about. And they had 3 examples of this in this podcast. So if you haven't seen the podcast, you should definitely go watch it. It's very entertaining. I shouldn't say watch it, it's a podcast. I listened to it while I was out on a walk. And so what that has really encouraged me and my team with respect to, and I'm going to use this moving forward as well, is we're not going to tell you what to do. You don't have to do what we say, right? Here are the recommendations that we see. There may be reasons why this recommendation doesn't work for you, right? I have some pieces of the products that I own right now. We have recommendations to do a reservation, right? You can save X dollars if you do 1 year or 3 years or whatever. But as the owner of the services, we happen to know those services are only going to live for 6 months. So it becomes a mathematical equation, right? I could buy the 1 year reservation for X dollars, and I need to look at what if I use it for the first 6 months and then I don't use it anymore because I'm going to replace what it is I have. Mathematically, it may still be worth buying, and you may do it. Or mathematically, maybe it's not, and then you won't. So you can't just take this list of cost optimization recommendations and shove them down somebody's throat, right? Because that's not going to work. And so you really have to partner well, which is where the trust piece comes in terms of what should we go after, what will work for us, what doesn't apply, what extenuating circumstances nobody knows except for the product owner that would decide what you're going to do. And so I think if you come at it more open-minded like that, versus hey, you need to do these 3 things or we're going to go report that you didn't, you have better success.
Yeah, nobody likes to be reported.
No.
And I think you even do a newsletter sometimes, don't you?
FinOps team does a quarterly newsletter, and we highlight what's going on in the FinOps world with all of our links for training and contact information. And the other thing that we did in the spirit of building trust is we called out a saving superhero. And it has a little cape and stuff. It's a little icon with a cape and everything. And we use it to call out one of our key customers who has really done something special in partnership with the team. And I'm carrying that forward now in our data and analytics environment. I'm looking at Data Dynamo, but if anybody else has a better idea, you could let me know about that. It's not going to have a cake, though, because now it's not a superhero, so I'm still adjusting to that. But anyway, we call out our partners that have done something really good with us. And maybe it's saving a huge amount of money. Okay, great. But maybe it's also piloting a new process for us and volunteering to be the guinea pig, right? Maybe it's also sharing some feedback with us about something and how we can improve it so that we could enhance our service offerings. And so in that newsletter, we call out quarterly somebody who's done something really well with us. Mm-hmm. And so we're kind of using that as a marketing thing too, because the people don't know when they're called out. So then when the newsletter goes out, they're like, wow, thanks, right? And of course, they're running off to show their boss, look, they called me out as a saving superhero this quarter. So I'm hoping
the kind of reporting that I would want to have.
Yes. So I'm hoping my Data Dynamo is going to have the same effect. We'll see. I'm not sure that's going to be the verbiage yet, but it's kind of the same thing. We want to build the relationship in terms of it's a partnership, right? It's not a dictatorial thing. And I think when we first started launching it, people were taking it as a dictator thing where, FinOps team said we had to do X and we didn't do it. Now we're going to get in trouble versus, hey, here's some recommendations. Let's review together.
Yeah. And Lisa, I think you told me once about that you sort of had some initial bumps, with adoption and understanding of what you were trying to do. But you all have a team that you said of 5 that goes around. Remind me.
Yes, we actually have a cloud economics team, and we're part of the larger, that's a big part of it was we were lucky because I had a background in engineering. I work in global supply chain. I was able to bring together asset services, contract management, and all of that interest-wise and be able to speak their languages. But what we did was we pulled in engineers and architects in the very beginning. And actually, one of our architects is here, and some of the folks who do some of our meetings with customers are here. And their whole job is to not only do their job and do architecture or engineering or meet with customers, but to constantly meet with the cloud team. So we have an overall cloud team management group, and within that is a cloud economics group. So cloud economics works with architecture and engineering and operations, and everybody knows the score, and we stay in contact very frequently. That keeps us very legitimized because, as I'm sure all of you can imagine within your own companies, there's different rumor mills, right? If a company that's engineering, there's an engineering rumor mill. There's a business management rumor mill. There's an accounting rumor mill. And so if you have people strategically located in all of those departments, when someone says, that cloud group, that person can go, actually, I work with them. So you get these advocates inside the company to help curb the rumors, but also come back to you and say, I have tons of people who IM me and say, I was in a meeting and wherever today, and this person said that. And I'm like, oh, good to know that team's not hearing our message. So let's get our newsletter, let's get our presentation, our website, whatever it is to combat the misinformation. You have to have a very aggressive marketing team if you're going to manage cloud.
Interesting. Yeah. Okay, I have a question for the audience. Does anybody else here do newsletters type things like that? I see 1, 2, 3. Okay, 4. Yep, good. Quarterly, okay. Does anybody have a question so far before I go any further? Oops. Okay, well, we've got one behind us. I don't want to go too far off topic before I sort of circle back. So hang on a second.
We have some good questions on them from the QR code. But
So Kim, earlier you mentioned, as designed versus as built. And I am wholeheartedly with both of you on making good culture and having good partnerships. And also sometimes there need to be consequences. Yes. What is your mechanism in a generalized way for making the consequences happen when somebody actually needs to be little bunny foo-fooed?
So we do a lot of leadership reporting and scorecarding and working toward that gamification aspect, which is what we're looking to do we're going to build on the analytics side as well. And so it's a tough spot because you have a relationship with these people, right? So you don't want to destroy that relationship by calling somebody out that didn't do what they were supposed to do, right? Because, maybe you're friends or maybe you're not friends, but you're peers and you don't want to destroy that relationship. But in the spirit of the scorecarding, the scorecard is the scorecard, and I can't really influence it. The numbers show what the numbers show. And so in the cases where people haven't done things that they shoulda, woulda, coulda done, right, it comes out on the scorecard. We just work really hard to make sure that nobody's surprised when they see it. And so, you know, when we're going to show an executive VP or something, you know, what this is, and they're going to see one business unit that didn't do something, that business unit knows this is what's coming out on the scorecard because you guys didn't do it. Maybe you have a good reason for not doing it. Fair enough. That's fine. And we can always put a footnote on it, put a little explanation. We can do that too. But so we do report it. We just work really hard to make sure that there are no surprises to anybody for what's coming out on the report. Correct.
That's a good point. Do we have another question, or do you want to give us one, Courtney, from the...
You know, we have some great questions that have come in. So Lisa, I'm going to start with one for you really quickly. Okay. All right. So here's the question for you, Lisa. You mentioned you don't lead with automation. You lead with the traditional human approach of discussing and listening, which is great. But at some point, it seems like automation is a must. When and how do you know the time is right for that transition?
When you can answer the question of why am I doing this automation, how much effort, cost, and most importantly, maintenance will this automation take? If you know all the answers to that, perfect time to do automation. We find, not just with our company, but with many people we talk to, that executives get excited about AI or automation or whatever, and everybody races out to do something. And what ends up happening, ironically, is your tech wizards get discouraged because they built something that was really cool and nobody wants to use it. But they didn't talk to everyone and figure out what would be good automation in the first place. So we do tons and tons of automation, but it goes through what I'll say a much more rigorous vetting process than it did previously. We want to hit the biggest impact for the most people and make the most people happy.
Good. Thank you. Got another one? Sure.
We'll do one more. Kim, this one is for you. You said you've built robust models to forecast the cost of a new product. Typically, what are your inputs into such a model, and how closely are you working with the engineering teams on that input or validating the outputs?
So on the analytics side, it has, I don't know, maybe 20 inputs. We look at the size of what's coming in, the data from a storage perspective. We look at how we're going to replicate that, what type of storage we're going to use. We look at, we use Databricks, but the same would be true if you use Snowflake or any of the cloud native services or whatever, right? How often we're going to load data in terms of daily, weekly, et cetera, how long we expect things to run. We look at if we're going to spin up clusters to do work, what are the SKUs in the clusters, and we input all of this stuff into a dashboard. The engineers built the dashboard with all of the pieces so that when you then hit the button, it comes out and says your projected monthly cost is X. And so they took that same idea from the analytics side and they built it out for the AI side as well. It has a lot more parameters on the AI side specifically, but you go through this whole thing, you fill out the form. It's basically, you know, a fancy spreadsheet in a portal, right? That has all the different drop downs or free-form fields or whatever, and then you hit the button there and it'll give you the same projection for a monthly cost. So we didn't really have to battle about it because the engineers built it. And then we've written training for, if we have other teams who are going to be filling it out, we wrote training for that so that people would understand what they're filling out and what the choices are and what the choices mean, so that we could really get in front of what is the projected cost. And then making sure when the actuals start to come in, are they meeting that projected cost or not? So that's how we did it.
Interesting. Does that answer the question for whomever? I hope. Okay. Another question from the audience, or do we want to have another one, Courtney?
I could how I figure it could be self-cut.
Hold on, we're going to get you the mic just because we all want to hear what you have to say.
I just had a follow-on question from that. How accurate have you found that calculated to be? Like when you do track it and look back at the actuals, how does that compare to your forecast?
Mixed results. Depends on how good the data is coming in. And so we're looking at ways to hold teams accountable for the quality of that forecast, plus or minus 10% or whatever your magic number is with respect to that. So that we can really incent the teams to have high quality in the inputs, right? Because there's also something to be said where people will say, we'll build something small and then scale it up when you need. You don't need to build it really big right away. And that's true too, except that we don't want to do the estimate really small. We're starting really small because then when we have to scale it up for full size, then of course we're like, oh, well, this doesn't match specifically. So it's an ongoing educational process with people and finding ways to hold people accountable and make sure that we're within the range. So I will say it's a journey. It's not a destination. And it's everything with FinOps.
Anyone else? I see a hand in the back. Thought I saw a hand in the back. Okay. No, go ahead. Let's do another one.
All right, I have one for both of you, and a couple people asked this. How did you get into the roles that you're in now?
Go.
Well, it's an interesting story since you asked. So I've been with PepsiCo 24 years, and I started on the DBA side. So I was in data, but it was Oracle, SQL Server, DB2, HANA, the mainframe databases, et cetera. And I did that for a really long time. And then I moved over to the cloud space and built out the operations team, the cloud migration team, our enablement team, which was for the cloud first projects coming through, et cetera, and built out the FinOps team. So it was sort of a career evolution. The cloud wasn't a job when I started in the cloud stuff. I was leading the DBA team, but wanted to get in cloud. So I was like doing it on the side, if you will, which then, ballooned into doing 2 jobs. And then at some point somebody said, hey, you really can't do 2 jobs. So you can only do this job. We're replacing you on the other side. But it was a specific thing that I did in terms of what we call a critical experience, working on the cloud stuff while I had another position, building my skills, taking training, doing certifications, exams, et cetera, to kind of pave the way for that role that I wanted. I didn't know for sure that I'd get it. We could have hired from the outside. It could have gone to somebody else. There were people that knew more than I did in that space and could have gone to that. But I kind of got lucky because I had laid all this groundwork and put all these pieces together that they gave it to me. My evolution was accidental. So I have always worked, I did work a first decade of my career in engineering for various companies. When I went to work for Northrop, I was hired to be the voice of engineering and to help the IT department do things, right? And so any initiative where they were emerging or converging or, migrating or whatever, I'd often get assigned to those types of things. And I've worked in a lot of different positions throughout Northrop Grumman. But when we started the cloud initiative, it was complete happenstance. I had helped someone figure out how to cost recover on-prem storage, which is not fun because you got to go dig in to see what a SAN's putting out, and figure out how to convert that into utilization parameters and everything. It's just tedious. So we're like, didn't you do some technical cost recovery? Can you go look at this cloud thing we're starting with? And it's been lovely, though, since, because I've been given complete freedom to, do what you think is best and come back to us and give us feedback. And that's why I say aggressive marketing is so important. Because if I hadn't said from day one, I've been doing this for 2 months and this is what I found. I've been doing this for 6 months and this is what I found. This is how much we saved. This is how many people it took. This is what would have happened if we hadn't existed. This is, and I have to do that not monthly, weekly, in every different level. You literally need someone out there shucking and jiving all the time, advertising, talking about how amazing your cloud group is. And so that's what's kept me there.
So you're somewhat of a marketer and translator.
Yeah.
In both.
We've got to speak all the languages.
Yeah. I do. Yeah. I remember us talking about that, about how it is so critical to engage all of the parts of your organization to really sort of bring that understanding into the point back to bringing the trust and the building.
Well, and the funny thing is I find myself oftentimes being almost a navigator or a concierge to other groups. Because I'll tell this very technical person who wants some crazy, awesome solution, we're going to talk to business management right now. So, and I'll tell you what you need to say and when you need to say it, because they're not interested in the coolest AI stuff ever. They're looking at their spreadsheets going, what's the value? What's the number? You know, so you do have to like coach people. And then you take that technical person, you go, here's some other technical people you can shop now, you know, go talk, you know. So it's all about languages and understanding what that particular group or organization understands and what their motivation is.
I think that's a key piece.
Go ahead.
I'm sorry.
No, I just was asking if that resonated with this group. I would assume so. That I see some heads nodding. Yeah.
It's so important because that's part of why we built this data and AI product management team specifically, is to do that translation, right? Because we'll have people, you know, articulate, well, we're upgrading this and we're migrating that and we're doing all these fancy things. But on the business side, you know, they're kind of like, so what? And it's not so what insulting like what you're doing is a waste of time. No, what they're doing is fine. But so what in terms of what value does it bring?
Right.
Why should people care?
Right.
And if I'm, you know, an executive way up here that's 5 levels above the engineer who's doing that work, right, what value are we bringing to the business? And so I also find the translation across the different teams and really speaking at the targeted level of your audience, you need to change your story.
One, it's a great way to build trust, right? If you help some of your customers navigate your own company, they love you.
Yes, that's true.
All right, we're sort of getting towards the end of time here a little bit. We have time for probably another question, but I do want to ask really quickly, someone starting their FinOps journey today, what are 2 or 3 examples of things that you would give as advice for them?
Do you want to go first?
Yeah, I'll start. First thing I would say is don't set up a bunch of meetings to talk about having meetings. That's going to be a waste of your time, right? You know, let's plan to plan, guys. Just take 4 hours, block out your calendar, go watch a bunch of YouTube things, dig into the data. The whole focus format is brilliant in its simplicity because whether or not you use the focus format, it's telling you all the classes of data you're going to have to care about in cloud. Whether you're a customer, whether you're a user or a designer, that's all the different, I'll say, taxonomies, you know, that you're going to have to care about. So you got to dig into that and say, where can I get this data? What comes naturally from the cloud? What have I got to generate from inside my company? There's got to be some kind of way when people get cloud, I can figure out who got cloud and how much and what department they're in and all that. So you're going to have to generate data sources to fill in the gaps of whatever's not automatically being delivered to you from your cloud provider. And that's a lot of data to understand who's budgeted what are your demand signals. You know, your cloud provider's not going to tell you all that, right? So you need other systems to store all that type of data. So I'd say number 1, dig into the data formats, frames, start thinking about how you're going to store the data, what kind of data you're going to get, what you need, what you can ignore. And I would say the other thing is pick 3 services, pick 4 services, and walk them through an imaginary onboarding process. We're going to start use the XYZ service in cloud provider Y. Okay, well, let's go look at the calculator. How does the cost get built up? How are we going to vend it? Are we going to provision it? Or is somebody else going to do it on their own? Do they need a help sheet or do we need to set up automation to provision it? So decide how you're going to deliver a service from end to end without actually doing it. Just do it as a mind exercise. And you'll realize all of a sudden that I need a request management organization. I need a cost recovery organization. I need a configuration management organization. I need some automation to manage all this. Oh, dear God, I'm overwhelmed. That's how you'll know you're on the right track.
There you go.
That's a great answer. So what we've looked at, if somebody's going to start from scratch, first off is do some education on your own. Do some reading on your own, the YouTube videos on your own. The FinOps Foundation has some really good new white papers specifically on FinOps for AI, which is one that I relied heavily on. But there are other topics within the FinOps space as well. And so we've encouraged people to get that information and digest that information, number one. Number two, we encourage people to take the training and the certification exams, right? Even if it's not going to be your job. And it's funny because, I was doing Azure administration classes and certification, or AWS solution architect. And, my kids are like, you're taking a test? Like, why are you doing this? For fun? What am I missing? I thought when I got out of college, I was done with this. And people at work were even, well, why would you do that? Because you're not going to be an Azure administrator or an AWS solution architect. I'm like, you are right. I am not, because that ship has sailed. And I'm not doing it. However, I did those things for a reason, because it helped me to be able to communicate well with the engineers and understand what they were talking about in the spirit of building trust.
Empathize.
And so I wanted to be sure that I could use the right vocabulary, so you don't look like an idiot. So I pushed those pieces specifically to help build the knowledge and the vocabulary so that you can converse with people. And then, to your point, right, go in and look at the costs. And it's an ocean, and it can be very overwhelming up front. And so don't look at everything. But, take a couple, maybe a couple of the bigger ones, and deep dive into understanding what are those costs, where are they coming from, what's driving them, whose are they, et cetera. And so that then you can start to understand all of the different pieces and how they plug in together, right? And that enables you then to go have the conversations with the engineers, with the business units, with whomever you need to go talk to understand the costs, where they come from, and more importantly, what they're going to be tomorrow from a projection perspective. Mm-hmm. Because you can look at the trend, right? All the cloud tools give you trending, right? It's $10 today, it's going to be $11 next month, it's going to be $12 next month, right? Whatever it is. That assumes there's no change, right? But everything changes. And so, if we do nothing, it's going to have a trend like this. But if we continue to provision more stuff, that trend is going to be very different. I don't think there's any true education for how to understand those pieces,
right,
without just digging in there and playing with it. And it reminds me, we use the Flexera tool set, obviously, for doing some of those things, but it reminds me of somebody many, many years ago, mentoring advice. And the person said, do you know how to do Excel pivot tables? And the project manager running the project did not. And this VP said, the only way to really understand your data in your spreadsheets is throw it all in pivot tables and look at your drop downs and your sums and your averages and your counts and all of those things. Look at what's missing. Why is it missing? Why do you have... Then look at the really big ones, look at the really small ones, blah, blah, blah. And that's when you've understood your data. And you can't read that in a book.
Yep.
You have to actually just do it in Excel and play with the pivot tables. And once you play with it, well, then you become a pivot table expert. It's the same thing on the cloud side. You have to actually go in and play with it and look at it and understand it. And if you wait for somebody to come explain it to you, you're never going to get there, right? It takes forever. You got to jump in and do it. So I think the FinOps Foundation and that education, I think the education from the cloud hosting providers, and then I think using the tooling to understand the costs and drill downs and everything else is really where I would start if I were starting the journey tomorrow.
Good advice. Okay, we have time for probably one more question. Is there somebody else, question from the audience? If not, Courtney, I'll go back to, I know we had some more.
We do. Any other questions? No? Okay. All right. We have a fun one to finish up here. We have about 3 minutes left. Okay. All right. So you've touched on this a little bit, but talk a little bit about motivating engineering. Heard a lot this week about pushing accountability and FinOps focused KPIs from the top down. You've been talking a lot here about empathy. What is the balance of pushing that accountability but maintaining empathy without being too gentle with the engineers so that they don't make changes?
Don't be nice to those engineers.
I was like, I've never been accused of being too gentle.
Gentle is a thing. I think the big thing is gamification. And I think, not that you have to actually make it a game, but when you present your scorecard data, let's say you're looking at % of spend saved or dollars saved or whatever, when you start it descending, there are people on top and there are people on the bottom. And then it doesn't become the, well, Kim said, well, Kim did, whatever, right? It's the data. And then I don't have to be gentle. I don't have to be mean. I don't have to be anything because the data is the data. And I can sort it this way and I can sort it that way.
Right.
And it will, by default, come out. And of course, nobody wants to be on the bottom specifically. And it also helps us to drive the conversations because maybe somebody didn't have time to do optimization, right? Because you hear all the stories about PI planning, the program increment planning, and it's in the backlog, and nobody ever gets to it in the backlog, and blah, blah, blah. And that's fine. In many cases, it's not even the engineer's fault, right? Because the stuff gets prioritized. And if that's not prioritized, they don't do it. And it's not to blame them specifically. But we use that to drive visibility to the conversation, right? Back to the person who is doing the prioritizing to say, hey, you didn't prioritize this, we get it. Just so you know, you've got X dollars on the table that we could go after if you prioritize this so that we can go drive for it. And so then, again, it becomes not a case of my being gentle or mean in that conversation. It's, is this X dollars important to you? Maybe it isn't because you've got some burning feature that you have to get out the door, this digital product that we're building. And so, we'll deal with the X dollars later. We got to get this thing out the door. Okay, fine. That's a business decision that we make collectively. And then when that piece is on the bottom of the report, we know why that is. And so to me, it's about driving that conversation because sometimes cost isn't the most important thing. Sometimes there are other business priorities that take precedence, and then we'll come back later and pick it up. And so that's kind of how we do it so that it's not taken like it's throwing somebody under the bus.
Well, and we actually have, I'll say, my personal 2 cents, I'm not prescribing it for your organization, but the best motivator is to cost recover. If you cost recover and someone screws up and they spend $10,000 extra, you can hold their hand and go, I'm so sorry this happened to you. But you've learned your lesson, haven't you? You don't have to go, please don't do that anymore. So if you have the opportunity to cost recover, you might think initially, such a pain to manage. It's well worth it. It is well worth the investment. And I think I'll say, being a middle child, I find I get the best motivation out of going, do you know what this other group did? And they saved 30%.
Nothing like a middle child to get in there and just dig a little on the others.
They compete like crazy. They'll even come back to me, and I'll have forgotten I even talked to someone 6 months ago, and they'll say, do you know what we did? And we saved more money than so-and-so. And I'm like, good job. Another success story.
There you go. Saving superhero.
Yes.
Yeah. But thank you all so much. And Lisa and Kim, thank you. This was amazing. I really enjoyed hearing from you.
Thank you all for coming.